Welcome inside Black and Gold. Choo-choo. Last road trip of the season. Heading to Tampa Bay to take on the Buccaneers. A must-win for the Black and Gold. Really is must-win. Losing any shot at the playoffs is over. The Tampa Bay wins, and they take a division crown for a third straight season. Or is it a fourth straight season? No, third straight season. Yeah. And obviously still a lot of questions around this team going into the matchup. And we'll talk about some of the injury news we got coming up. Some comments that Bobby Hebert made towards Mickey Loomis that kind of, I guess you would say, upset.
Yeah. I guess you could say upset. I think it was more of shit. It's just anytime Mickey talks now, everyone has this like visceral reaction, like
this guy off by the question.
This guy. Yeah, I mean, it's we'll get into that. That's something we can talk about in the final segment. And then obviously we're gonna have JC Allen, Bucs reporter here to kind of break down what to expect because we still have games to play. It is funny because. I think the resounding idea on social media these days is that the Saints don't have a chance to make the playoffs, and I understand that. But the fact is they do. So it's like you're not going to hear that take from the coaches and GMs because they're still playing for something. But I guess my first question, Steve, is: do grits expire?
See, that's a great question from a Yankee that I don't know either. I wouldn't imagine they do.
How it's corn, right? It's just like It's just like grain. Like how could it expire? But I had grits this morning for breakfast, and on the bag it said expired in May, and I was like, I think I'm going to risk it.
So if Jeff ends up getting sick during this cast, we know what happened.
Well, what's the worst that happens? Like what could go? Like I get like milk is gross and like curdles and stuff, but it's like anyway. It's not like there's mold in there because that's my go-to breakfast. I make some grits, I fry 2 eggs, just try to make some potatoes, I throw it in a bowl. It's a good time. That's what I had for breakfast this morning, and the expired grits taste the same as the non-expired grits. I think at a certain point you're just putting labels on something to just to scare you. Just to make it so they have to restock the shelves and buy more. But talking about expired grits, I did. Well, what happened in Denver this week was very funny. And I know people get annoyed with us continuing to talk about Sean Payton and his antics, but I do appreciate that the NFL at large is kind of finally discovering how much of a dick Sean Payton is because the man just benched Russell Wilson. And the irony of the situation is that Sean Payton is benching Russell Wilson to start the same quarterback who Derek Carr was benched for in Las Vegas, because it's going to be Jarek Stidham. And it didn't even dawn on me until we were talking to Derek Carr yesterday and he was asked about it. And he was just like, oh, is Stiddy starting? And I was like, oh, he's got a nickname.
Right.
But I just can't help but wonder. It's like, why would you go to Denver if you were, not even like the slightest bit committed to Russ?
Right.
Why would we even take that job? What he must have hated broadcasting. He must have, regardless of what he said, he must have been like, get me the F out of here, because I mean, that's not a good situation. Right? Like it's only a good situation if you have the quarterback. Now he doesn't have the quarterback. They don't have a second round pick, and they don't really have a good enough pick that they can, or assets that they can go up and trade for a high pick to get the quarterback. So
yeah, because that hole they gave up for us was pretty phenomenal.
I just wonder. It's like maybe he wants Taysom Hill. How funny would that be?
I wonder if Sean's having any regret now about leaving New Orleans.
Well, I mean, like, I don't think based on how things have gone in New Orleans since he left, I don't think it would have been that much better. But it's just like you could have just waited out the Chargers.
That's what I think a lot of people were anticipating, that it seemed like the perfect fit. You had the quarterback obviously ready and waiting in Herbert. But no, he went with Denver, and now it's Broncos country. Let's ride the bench.
And I am fascinated. So where does Russ end up? Right? Where maybe he wants to trade for Derek Carr. Maybe they should trade Russ for Derek Carr straight up. Maybe that'll work. Because Russ will start somewhere, right? Maybe New York, the Giants, the Jets have Aaron Rodgers. I'm just like, he's going to end up somewhere. He's not going to retire. I don't think he's good.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. They're definitely. There should be a landing spot for Russ somewhere, but yeah, I'm not quite sure where that's going to be either. But I mean, the relationship from the very beginning seemed tumultuous between those two, and obviously has not gotten any better.
No, it's like it kind of looked awkward from the outside, and then you see it now. It's like, okay, it was awkward the whole time. We were not imagining that. The fact of games they did is kind of remarkable. But I mean, it's like you try to figure out. It's like, so Tampa, what are they going to do? We can talk about that. That's what I want to talk to JC about, because we're going to talk about Tampa a lot, and I think Tampa was setting this thing up to break. Right? They were setting it up. They were building it to spill, and it didn't spill. And now they're kind of in the situation the Seahawks were in last year, where it's like, we didn't anticipate having to pay Geno $140 million, but I guess we have to,
right?
And so like that's going to be interesting to talk about. But like he's got to go somewhere, and I just don't know where that is. Like Green Bay's got a young quarterback, right? Minnesota, maybe Minnesota's the answer, because it's a team that seems like it has weapons, right? But again, it's like, who's paying that guy? Is he gonna anyway? That's going to be a really fascinating thing to watch this offseason. But another fascinating thing that we're going to watch this offseason, and that's going to be playing out over the final 2 weeks, is young players on the Saints. And kind of, to me, I think it's important to kind of evaluate who the core young players are on this roster, because there are a decent number of them. I don't think there are enough, and I don't think there are enough, like star young players that you can see developing into star players, right? Like there are a handful of them, and we're going to go through them. But one of the question marks, I have some that I feel good about, and some that I still have some question marks on. And one of those players is Alontae Taylor, just because, they kind of shifted him into this slot corner role. I don't think it's gone particularly well, but it's like, I don't want to judge him too harshly from a career arc on struggling in a role that was probably never his ideal role to begin with.
Yeah.
And that's being in the slot. And he obviously got benched in week 16. And it's like, I think there's always a good, an interesting thing to watch of like, okay, how does a young player deal with getting benched? And one of the things I like the most about Alontae Taylor is his mindset and his approach to things. And so here's a clip of just him talking in the locker room on Wednesday and kind of breaking down, what happened, blah, blah, blah.
What was your pulse of why the switch was made during the game, and how did you react to it?
Really just because I had some situations later in the game, really that series, where my eyes got bad and some explosive plays were made. The way I reacted, it wasn't the best reaction on the sideline, but I had guys kind of rally around me as far as like Tyron and Carr, Jonathan Abram, Keith Kirkwood. Those guys kind of came up to me, talked to me, kind of calmed me down a little bit, and from there I just cheered on Ugo and the rest of the team from the rest of the game.
And what do you mean by eyes being bad? Like what does that mean to?
The Rams, they do a lot of motioning, and there was times where the guys was like motioning, and then I was looking at the wrong person or like the wrong gap. So whenever it came to the run game, I wasn't fitting certain gaps, and there were certain times where I should have like bumped out with a receiver or a tight end or whatever, and I ended up just kind of locking on my guy. So I learned a lesson for me, but I've grown from it. So now we're getting ready for Tampa, so I'm not so much worried about it.
Do you think you're getting every opportunity to get right back in there?
Yeah, I'm back in the starting lineup. Like nothing happened before. So taking advantage of my reps now, and like I said, just getting ready for Tampa.
Does the preparation change for a game like this week in practice? Like maybe I guess focusing more on, like you mentioned, like the eye test and things like that.
Not really. I feel like for me, it was more so of just trying to make too many plays instead of letting the plays come to me. So, I got to look inside and just do my job and just put my eyes in the right place. And, Tampa, they don't do as much motioning, but, if they look at last week's game, they feel like they want to do that. I'm up for the challenge. We work on that now, and I've been watching a lot of tape on last week's game. So I'm going to be all right.
And yeah, that's what you heard from the coaches, right? Like that's what kind of what Dennis Allen said after the game. He got beat with his eyes a couple times. He was on the sideline. Like, I got a good look at it. He was kind of sulking on the bench. Derek Carr, Tyrann Mathieu, Keith Kirkwood, Jonathan Abram, a lot of yay rah guys, they all came up to him and, gave him a pep talk. He eventually got up, started cheering on the team. He admitted it wasn't a good reaction from him. He should have handled it better. But I think I think in a lot of instances, a young player, the first open locker room session, or second, I guess, because they had an open locker room on Monday, but like the first kind of after the first practice following getting benched, to stand in front of your locker and not only talk to the media, but invite the media over. Cause that's what happened is, he was just like, you guys want to talk? Come on. And like, that's a very mature way to approach that.
Sure.
And, you look at a guy who I think is going to be a core piece of this team going forward. And there's a lot of ways that could have gone. There's a lot of ways you can react to that scenario. And I thought he handled it very well. And again, I don't know if he's going to get better in the slot. I don't think his future is as a slot corner in the NFL. So I need to see him continuing to engage. And I think that's what he is doing. I asked Derek Carr, how he kind of responded because Derek was one of the players that talked to him on the sideline. And, he said he's responded well. From what he can tell, he had a good day of practice. Obviously, they're not on the same side of the ball. But, that's, I think, again, I spent a good time this morning looking at like, okay, who are the core players? And he's one of them. I think, it's funny because you look at a team that has Marshawn Lattimore, but I also look at a team that has to try to reset the deck somehow. And I do like that core group of Paulson Adebo and Alontae Taylor, however it shapes out over the next 4 or 5 years. I think that is kind of your building group of corners. Because Marshawn, while still very, very good, is 28. And is he 28? How old is Marshawn? He's 27. He'll be 28 before the start of next season. So, what if you're like me and you kind of see this as a long-term kind of restocking of the locker room, of the roster, so that maybe in 2-3 years you can be back to a title contender. Marshawn really can't be part of that group because by that point he will be out of his prime. So I think guys like Alontae Taylor, Paulson Adebo, those are important. So I appreciated how he reacted to all of that this week.
Yeah, and I'm just curious, when are the Saints, Dennis Allen, gonna stop the experiment of Alontae in the slot and put him back on the outside?
I don't think it's going to be this year.
Right. Will we see that happen, though, next season kind of thing? Because, I don't know. To me, when we talked to him early on, even in training camp, I just got that vibe from him that he wasn't necessarily thrilled about this move in general. And I don't think it has worked out well this year.
Now, early in camp, he was competing for the outside corner job. It wasn't until late in camp that he really got shifted. He was getting some backup slot reps, but it wasn't until the end that he shifted late. And I think that the equation is, okay, do you want him an outside corner or do you want him in the nickel? Because if you keep him at outside corner behind Paulson Adebo and Marshawn Lattimore, he's not playing. And I think the idea is, you get your best players on the field. And I do think that getting him reps this season was more valuable than having him sit behind Marshawn and Alontae. And Paulson. So in that frame, I understand it. And right now, it doesn't make sense to change midstream. But yeah, going into next season, that's why, we talked about it. And I know that there's contract issues that you have to figure out and be a lot of dead money. But if you shift into asset collection mode, my first step would be trying to figure out how can you kind of rebuild your asset, your war chest, right? And I think Marshawn, despite all that dead money, would be valuable because you would be able to stomach it because you would end up starting younger players who are on smaller contracts, and you would be able to stomach some of that debt. But anyway, that's another conversation for another day. Well, right. What I do want to talk about, so I came up with a list of the core young players on this roster. Yeah, because there are a good number of them, but there are way more with question marks than I'd like to see. So on the defense, the young players that I feel like are a part of the future, and this is generally like 27 or younger, and it's really younger than that. I just put it at 27 because Carl Granderson's 27, and I want him on this list, but he's a little older just because he got a later start. But in terms of tread on the tires, he's a young 27, if that makes sense. Because he's only played so many snaps in the NFL. So I still view him as a guy. He's going on to his second contract. He's going to be here for a while. So, and he's played well. He's getting better. He's ascending. So he's on my list. So Carl Granderson is one of those guys. There are 3 players that I have stars next to in the sense that I am convinced these will be star players over the next 4 or 5 years. So Paulson Adebo on the defense, there's 2 of them. Paulson Adebo and Carl Granderson. Those are the 2 starting kind of star caliber players that you expect to continue to get better. Will probably be a Pro Bowl ceiling by the time they kind of reach their peak. Beyond that, on the defense, cornerback Alontae Taylor, I still really like his game. Defensive tackle Brian Brzee, linebacker Pete Warner, safety Jordan Howden. Those are the only players that I'm confirmed feel like these are starting players next season for you on the defense. That's not enough. That is not enough in terms of you need young players to build with. You know, I like the cornerbacks. I like Brian Brzee. I like these players, but you don't see an edge rusher on there, do you? I guess no. You have Carl Granderson, right? But you don't see like young edge. Even if you eliminate Carl Granderson from this list because he's 27, you don't have a young edge rusher that you're like, oh yeah, that guy's developing. He'll be really good in a few years. Now,
we just haven't seen enough of anything from Foskey. You'd love to have him on the list, but just haven't seen it. Right.
There are a few players that I have labeled UGG, and he's one of them in terms of Peyton Turner, Isaiah Foskey. You know, they just can't stay on the field. They can't stay healthy. And so I'm not selling on Isaiah yet, but it's just another episode of like, this is the entire season, right? This is not like you had like a 2-game stretch where you had an ankle injury. It's like you've missed half the season with a quad injury. And he's back at practice this week. He looks like he's trending in the right direction to potentially return maybe this week or next week. But you've effectively missed a good chunk of your rookie season and the chunk of it that you really had an opportunity with Cam Jordan dealing with an injury. You're not there. You've not been able to take advantage of it. So it's just another UGG. And after dealing with Marcus Davenport, Peyton Turner, it's just like another installment in the injured defensive end show that we've seen. And it's made all the more frustrating by the fact that we've seen a guy in Cam Jordan who never misses games. So, you know, it's possible, you know?
Yeah.
So like, that's really it, you know, and I think Peyton Turner, I think he, you know, you're not cutting him. So it's just like, you're going to go into next season. Hopefully, you know, I'm hoping that he can get back for the final 2 games and maybe gain some momentum so that next season you go into it and like, okay, maybe this is the time. But you know, after 3 years of just injury, it's just it's hard to believe that he can get through even 12 games of a season. So that's frustrating to me.
Yeah. The scouting department on their defensive ends has just done a wonderfully awful job of finding guys that are just always banged up.
Yeah, and I don't even know if it's like, is it a scouting thing? It's just like there seems to be an element of randomness there that I don't know if you can scout it.
Right.
But I mean, like a quad injury, like it's not like that's. Yeah, we saw in college he was leaning on that quad a little too hard. That's not how it works. But yeah, so that's frustrating. Now on the offensive side, and that's the thing, on the defensive side, you actually have a lot more names than you have on the offensive side. On the offensive side, I only have 3 names that I'm very confident in terms of these are young players, reasonably young players, that are going to be a part of your future. So one is center Eric McCoy, who's somehow only 26. I feel like he's been around forever. He was drafted in 2018. He was the first pick off the board in 2018 because you didn't have that first round pick because of the Marcus Davenport trade. But he's been very good. You also had CJ Gardner-Johnson in that draft. It'd be nice to still have him around, but you know, whatever. Then the other 2, wide receiver Chris Olave and wide receiver Rashid Shaheed. Those are the only 3 that I'm like looking at as for sure you are our starter next year, and I'm not worried about it. Beyond that, there are a handful of players that I'm putting on the fringe, but not completely confident in yet. One is probably the most disappointing player of the season in terms of expectations versus reality, in tight end Juwan Johnson. If you had asked me going into this season, I'd been like, he's for sure the long-term starter at tight end. And now you're just like, I guess, maybe. I wouldn't mind an upgrade. Let's put it that way.
No, that was definitely, like you said, one of the big disappointments of how we were raving during training camp. And it just, I don't know, for whatever reason, has not materialized this year among many things.
Yeah, the other one is guard Cesar Ruiz, which I think Cesar has been fine. I really was hoping he would take a bigger leap this year, and I just haven't seen it. And here's the thing. He's a first-round draft pick.
Yeah.
At guard. And I saw someone tweet, I think it might have been Matt Miller. He tweeted, like, how good does a guard or a center have to be for you to take them in the first round? And it's like, no, they have to be like a Quentin Nelson type player, an impact player, to be a legit first-round pick at guard, at interior line. And Cesar has not been, like, he's been solid, but you can find solid guards. I mean, first-round caliber guards, they got to make impacts, and I haven't seen that from him. So that's why I have him on the fringe.
No, I agree totally with your list, unfortunately. And you think with the draft capital invested, obviously, at O-line and what we've talked about with D-line, there'd be more to talk about there. The Trevor Penning experiment is a huge question to me. And I'm just wondering, does that things change next year for him, maybe with a new O-line coach? I really don't know.
Trevor Penning is on my UG list.
Yeah.
Not UGG, but UGH. We're not talking about boots. I imagine you have to try to get him involved. Like, you have to try to get him, maybe next year going into it, you're just like, we're going to give him another shot, whether it's at left tackle or guard. You got to do it. He's a first-round pick. You got to find a way. But, I'm not feeling great about that, obviously. The other two players I have on the fringe for the Saints in terms of the offense, wide receiver A.T. Perry, running back Kendre Miller, I think both have flashed. Like, I think they've both looked fine. Kendre's a guy who's dealt with injuries, could be back this week. But I do think what you've seen out of him in a season where you didn't expect a ton behind Alvin and Jamal has been you've seen him be explosive. And A.T. Perry, you've also seen him be explosive. So I feel decently about those, but I'm not going to slot them in as starters yet in terms of I just haven't seen enough. There's a few others that I think are kind of interesting. You look at future players and potential. So wide receiver Shaq Davis, he's on the practice squad. I still like him. The linebacker DeMarco Jackson, he's been a special teams guy, but I think, as you go forward, you're going to try to incorporate him more. Nephi Sewell's in that group too.
I like Nephi a lot.
Nick Saldivari, just a guy we haven't seen any of, but I'm still like, they drafted him for a reason. I think you're developing in. Hopefully at a certain point, you'll be able to get him in there. And then Jake Haener, who knows? These are guys that I just have no grade on because we haven't seen them. At least in the sense of the actual offense or defense. DeMarco's obviously played well on special teams, and he'll stay around for that reason alone. And I'd probably be Craig Robertson type as you go forward with maybe some upside. But that's kind of my list. That's the entire list. And so you look at it and you say, okay, it's a 53-man roster. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Only 20 players of that 53-man roster would qualify for even any of these. And that's including 7 players who are on the either UG or no grade at all list. So you're talking about 13 players effectively that you're looking at and saying, yeah, these are contributing young core players and the rest are veterans or whatever. And that's when I look at this roster and I say, it just doesn't profile well. The trajectory is not good. That's what I'm talking about, is that the numbers on this list are not big enough.
No, unfortunately, yeah, the draft hasn't been a spot where this team's, made the draft. Maybe later rounds has been successful, but man, those picks in the early rounds have really been a disappointment, and obviously that's hurting him tremendously right now.
Yeah, I think, and this is something I want to talk about in a later episode. One of the issues I have is the strategy, not so much. I think their hit rate in the draft is a decent number just in terms of how many picks you make versus how many times you find a decent player in the draft. I think the issue has been the number of darts you've had to throw at the board has not been enough, because the way the Saints operate is they trade up, they try to go get their guy. Well, that works when the guy is right, right? That works when it's Chris Olave. When it's Trevor Penning, then it's a huge problem because you don't have the volume, so you can't make up for that. And so that's going to be something I think we can get into as we get, maybe starts this week. Who knows? And we'll be able to get into that with our guest who's coming on, JC Allen, Bucs reporter and writer for Bucs Game Day. And, he was on here earlier this season, and I feel like the conversation went a certain way. It's going to be interesting to see how the conversation goes this time, because if I was covering the Bucs right now, I would be so smug in terms of how this season has gone. And so we will be getting into it. But this is Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak. He's Steve Geller. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do that. Otherwise, stick around. And we're back here on Inside Black and Gold, getting into the segment, getting ready for Bucs 8-7, Saints 7-8, and we're bringing in JC Allen, Bucs reporter and writer for Sports Illustrated's Bucs Game Day. He also hosts a podcast called Pirate Parlay. It's not about betting; it's about pirates.
It's about the Bucs,
as you might have guessed. But JC, it's funny because you look at these two teams. One is 8-7, one is 7-8. And I think in a different world, you'd be like, well, both these teams are terrible. But I think because of how the Bucs approached this season, it's only a 1-game difference, but it feels like a huge difference in terms of how these seasons have gone for Tampa compared to New Orleans. And I'm just curious, so what's the vibe these days around this team?
Oh, all positivity. They know they control their own destiny. They know a win against the Saints locks up the NFC South, gives them the 4th seed, and kind of cements possibly a winning record for the first time since 2 years ago. Last year was obviously one of those up and down seasons. But I think when you look at it, the Bucs started out 3-1, went on a 1-6 game losing streak, won 4 in a row with a chance to potentially win 2 more and finish out the season on a 6-game win streak. You look at this team, and a lot of people counted them out right off the get. They're going to have a top 3 pick. But the talent on this team has always been there. It's always, you looked at it and you're like, how is this team, even with Baker Mayfield, who I thought got the benefit, didn't get the benefit of the doubt. You look at him, what he came in to deal with in the league. He had his best season when he was healthy in 2020. Then his last season in Cleveland, he was all sorts of banged up. Last year was never a fit anyways. We talked about that schematically and everything the first time I was on this show. It took a while for the offense to kind of get the system, get the scheme, get the concept, especially in the run game. But now that they have, you've seen the offensive output the last couple of games. They've been able to move the ball down the field, been able to put points on the board. And the defense has really kind of tightened up a little bit too to prevent these teams from moving the ball. They're still letting up a lot of explosive plays down the field, but the red zone defense is one of the best in the league.
Obviously, you mentioned with Baker Mayfield, what has been the key with him the last couple games? Dude's been on a heater, and obviously the biggest key, not turning over the ball.
Right, yeah, I think it's a firm grasp of the system. Remember, he was in that quarterback competition in the offseason with Kyle Trask, so he split half of those snaps. So he had to. It was going to take him a while, A, to get the system down at the back of his hand because he had to make up all those snaps, and then B, get on that same chemistry and wavelength with his players. And you're seeing that now. They're starting to have the same the chemistry is there. He knows the system inside and out. Dave Canales, the rookie offensive play caller, his play calling and sequencing has gotten much better. The run game, I had Dave Canales on my podcast earlier, and he said, even in Seattle, it took about half a season for the guys up front to really get the blocking schemes and get what we're trying to do in the run game. And once that we hit that turning point, you saw the success. And, that's kind of what happened this year. The run game has been much better, which has made it easier for Baker. His decision-making's been better. I did play against Carolina, so, you kind of throw that one out there too. But they had just gotten all the weapons back from IR, so, you kind of look at that as well. But anytime you're facing a Joe Barry defense, I guess, that's a gimme as well. But I think when you look at the situation that Baker was in previous years, and this year, there was always that what if, right? What if he's healthy? What if he's in a system that highlights his strengths? And you're seeing that right now play out in the last 4 games.
Yeah, I do wonder, it kind of reminds me of the situation Seattle was in last year, where you move on from Russ and you kind of bring in Geno Smith, and everyone's like, oh, this is kind of just a just a walkover year. He's keeping the seat warm for whoever they're going to end up drafting, and then he plays well. Right, kind of ruins that draft pick at the end of the day. Like, I don't know if Seattle is happier now because of that, but obviously they are competitive. They have a chance to make the playoffs. So but they did pay Geno, right? And so I do wonder, Baker's on that 1-year deal. What do you do? Do you kind of, because I feel like it was kind of built to tear, right? Like it was never a we're going to bring in Baker and see if he's the QB of the future. It was more, and correct me if I'm wrong, it was more like, okay, we're going to see what happens this year and move on. But I think the idea was always there's a lot of QBs in this draft. We can find our next starter, and we're not going to oversell anything this year that limits us down the road. Well, you think, do you have a quarterback that's played well enough to give him that? I don't know, whatever that Geno level deal is.
I think you do. And I think when the Bucs ultimately, when they walked in the season, they're like, well, let's see what we have, right? He's a former number 1 overall pick. He's immensely talented. It's not like this guy hasn't been talented. He went through 3 offensive coordinators and 3 head coaches in his first 3 seasons. When he finally got some stability, he had his best season, led the Browns to the playoffs in the first time since however long. The next year he's hurt, wearing a shoulder sling, can barely throw the ball. They decide to go get Deshaun Watson. That hasn't worked out well for them. And again, he went to a Matt Rule system. Matt Rule was fired quickly. That system just was not fit for what his strengths are. They didn't have all the pieces around him. And they moved on from him. But when you look at, what the Bucs envisioned, hey, if we're competitive, we're winning this, going to win this division, maybe make a small splash in the playoffs, then why not stick with Baker? You look at the landscape around the field right now in free agency at quarterback. Kirk Cousins coming off an Achilles. He's most likely going back to Minnesota anyways. Do you really want to roll the dice with Ryan Tannehill? No, you probably don't. Do you want to reunite with Jameis Winston? No, you probably don't. So like if everything worked out, you weren't going to be in a position to get one of those guys, to get a Drake May, to get Caleb Williams, and to get a Jaden Daniels, who's come out of nowhere really kind of this season and really put up phenomenal stats. Or maybe you're in the range for a Michael Penix or a Bo Nix, one of those guys, maybe a Mike McCarthy, but I don't
JJ McCarthy,
whatever, both of them.
Mike is the head coach of the Cowboys.
Yeah, they're both terrible. But no, I think when you look at it, sure, maybe you get one of those guys in the first round, but then at that point, you're probably not going to start them right away. You're not going to throw them right in the fire. So you need a guy. So I think the plan was, if Baker performs well, if the offense does well, if the team does well, then yes, we'll bring this guy back. At 3 years, $75 million, that's 25. That's a lower end of the quarterback market. And I think that's a fair deal. He wants to be in Tampa, which is huge for their negotiation process. And they're going to want him back, And at the end of the day, it's still $75 million less than the Saints gave Derek Carr. So what can you do?
That's fair.
Hey, you look at that Buccaneers receiving core. Obviously, Mike Evans, someone who leads the way for them. Guy number 1 in receiving touchdowns right now in the NFL. Just talk about how much that developed, the relationship with him and Baker has developed since the beginning of the season. It just seems more and more confidence Baker has in him to just throw it up, and he knows he's going to get it.
Yeah, Mike is he's always been an underrated performer. His route running is super underrated. It's not just a deep ball jump guy, go get it. Chris Godwin's probably a better contested catch receiver than Mike Evans, and you're starting to see that. The ability of the last 3 seasons really with Byron Leftwich were all about long developing routes, vertical routes, no risk it, no biscuit type deal. And by last year, it worked the first 2 years because you had Gronk and AB and all these other guys around you to focus on. The last year, when you could just too high Mike the whole game and take him out of it, it was difficult for him to get production, especially because the offense was so antiquated. Teams knew what they were doing. They didn't change a damn thing since 2020, except their tight end, their Kate Otten. They didn't, and their running back. They knew what teams were going to do against them. What the Bucs were going to do with it, and they played their hand. This year, Mike's lining up all over the place. He's lining up in the slot. The depth of his routes have changed. He's still that guy who can go down, take a guy down the seam and win one-on-one. But a lot of what they're doing now is moving him around all of the field, so he's not getting these tight releases where he's able to get some space in his releases and confuse some of the safeties and manufacture some of these one-on-ones instead of just, beating his man, or them having, if you're the Panthers, having a mental lapse and not doubling Mike, they're able to do that. And Baker relies and trusts him so much because of the connections they have and because of the track record. I mean, Mikey's one of the best guys to do it in the league. And he's proven that. He's a first ballot Hall of Famer. If you take out tight ends, he's 10th all time in touchdown receptions. He's climbing up the yardage list as well. And when you have a guy like that, he can make plays. So you find him to make plays. It's been all season, and it's come alive the last couple weeks for sure. With the 2 touchdown games and just getting him in these situations, and that a lot of that credit goes to Dave Canales too, is just putting him in these situations to thrive, and Baker realizing, I've got the guy, I'm going to give the ball to the guy that makes the magic happen.
Yeah, and I mean, he's not gonna have to deal with Marshawn Lattimore this time. So I am very worried about what Mike might be doing in this game. But I am curious. This is one of these rematches are always kind of fascinating in terms of the chess match of like what works in week 4 versus how you might try to change that up. So I guess I know the run game has really picked up for the Bucs over this winning streak. What has been different for this team compared to what the Saints saw early in the year? It seems like there's pretty good health in terms of you haven't seen a ton of changes necessitated by that on the Bucs side, whereas on the Saints side, it's a very different looking roster based on the health.
Right. One of the things other than Russell Gage and Ryan Jensen is the Bucs don't have anyone on long-term injured reserve. So health has been a huge on the side of them for sure. Carlton Davis is in concussion protocol. They've had guys out for a few games at a time, but no in long term. So they've been able to get a lot of those guys back, which has been huge for them as far as no season-ending injuries. Knock on wood. This is actually particle board. Let me knock on the real wood. But no, I think that's part of it. But like I mentioned, the running game getting going, the system, Baker knowing the system better, Dave Canales finding his groove as a play caller and a sequencer. Because that was his 4th ever game calling plays at the NFL level. So, having all this experience and the experience with the young guys too. You look at guys like Christian Izzian, who's playing his 4th ever game at nickel. Now he's got a ton of experience. Yaya Diaby has really come on. He's been the starter for the last 5 games. He's probably on pace to win Defensive Rookie of the Year right now. Had a 1.5 sack, 2 sack performance, however you call them. A sack is a sack to me, but forced fumble recovery. He's just been lights out over the last couple of weeks. Elijah Cansey, who you guys didn't get to see in week 1, has been a force as well. He's right up there. They're 1-2 in tackles for loss. He's an explosive, get in the backfield type of guy. They've got other guys who've gotten snaps too. Kayvon Merriweather at safety if he needs to come in. So they've got a lot of young guys. They had a lot of undrafted guys. They had a lot of drafted guys come in and make plays. Payne Durham has stepped up. He made a really nice catch last week. He's not going to be used a ton, but there's another tight end weapon that they have to use at their disposal. Cade Otton's blocking has night and day from week 4. So there's quite a few changes, not much in personnel wise, just as experience wise, whether that's in the system, whether that's the young guys getting play, whether that's the offensive coordinator getting that experience throughout the system. I would say experience is probably the biggest thing from week 4 to now, and cohesiveness, experience in the run block. So, I think that would be the biggest change from now. But the personnel grouping is still pretty much the same. They did make a change at left guard with Aaron Stinney coming in from Matt Filer, but other than that, that's about it.
Also impressive with this Bucs squad. They are plus 10, obviously, in the plus-minus giveaway takeaway ratio. Not getting a ton of takeaways, but obviously that means they're holding on to the football.
Yeah, they you look at Baker has only 1 interception in the last 4 weeks. So, he's not giving he had a fumble, but he's not giving the ball away, and they're taking the ball away. Antoine Winfield Jr., in my mind, should not only be an all-pro, but probably the defensive player of the year. If you want to look at, you take away the sack numbers, right? Don't just focus on the sack numbers, which they love to do. Look at impact on a team, and who has impacted the team the most, who has kept them in games, who has won them games. it's Antoine Jr. I mean, for a safety, he's got over 100 tackles, 3 interceptions, 4 fumble recoveries, 5 forced fumbles, 5 sacks. He's been doing it in every single way possible a safety can do it, and he's been a huge catalyst of that. So I think you look at him and what he's been able to do as far as generating turnovers. I think he should at least be on the ballot, if not a top 3, if not the top guy, but a top 3 guy as far as that. And other guys have stepped up and contributed too. And like I just said, Diaby had that forced fumble recovery. So it's all Baker not making mistakes with the football. A lot of it too is Rashad White has been really sound and secure with the ball, not fumbling. There hasn't been many turnovers as far as tip balls off wide receivers' hands. They're either in the dirt or they're caught. So that's been huge too. You see a lot of those times. Sometimes quarterbacks, they have those interceptions and they start piling up because they're going off guys' fingertips. That really hasn't happened this year. Baker's had a few tipped at the line and intercepted. That's been a big issue. Him, guys with longer arms can get in the way and knock some balls down, but they haven't resulted in many turnovers. So that's been a huge plus for them as well.
You dealing with a cat over there? What's going on?
I got a cat. I got kids. It's spring break, man. My wife is working in my office, so I'm out in the kitchen trying to just survive the wilderness.
Gotcha. I understood.
Winter break.
Right. It is funny because it's like we talked a lot about a lot of things the Bucs have done well, but they did have that stretch where they went 1-6. So I guess my question is, when things weren't going well, what was going wrong? What are kind of the pitfalls that this team has run into when it has run into them? Because that's it's kind of strange because we talked about this before we came on. From what I've seen of the Bucs, it's been spectacular. I've paid pretty close attention for that 3-1 start, which included that pretty sound win over the Saints, and I've paid pretty close attention over the last several weeks because getting ready for this matchup. But in between that, it was down in flames for a period of time. So what did go wrong during that stretch?
It was Bucs beating Bucs. Really, that's what it came down to. It was, taking themselves out of position in scoring drives with penalties, making bonehead mistakes in coverage lapses, letting guys get behind you for those big gains. Really, if you look back at the tape, the Bucs have never been out of a game at halftime. Not to San Francisco, not to the Bills, not to the Eagles, not to any of these top Lions, not to any of these top teams in the NFL, especially in the NFC, have they been out of a game at halftime. After halftime, during that streak, there was just self-destruct mode. They'd get holding penalties, false start penalties, defensive pass interference penalties. They'd be miscommunication on the defensive end to let guys just book it down the field behind them. That was a huge part of why they were losing those games, not being able to finish games out. Some of the turnovers happened in there as well with Baker. But that was a huge thing, is just beating themselves. Because they were either beating teams or down 1 score in every game this season that they've lost. So they've kind of cleaned up penalties a lot. Obviously, Baker's not turning the ball over as much. The defensive is kind of tightened up a little bit. They're not giving, they're still giving up explosives, but not explosives to beat them. Their red zone defense has tightened up. Their red zone offense has produced a little bit more as well. And again, that all goes back to experience, right? Finding their groove in the system, finding their groove as players, finding their groove as play callers. That was a adversity point, and they're coming out of that, now with a chance to close out the season strong and potentially make a splash in the playoffs, where you look, especially in the last couple of weeks in the NFC, the top dogs have all gotten beaten in upsets. It's like there's no one has really. I mean, I guess you can look to San Francisco and say, yeah, they're probably the best team in the league. But, at least in the NFC, but they've shown that they can be beatable. The Bucs nearly beat them. The Eagles, the Bucs nearly beat them. I think it's wide open for the Bucs if they can continue to make a splash. Now, I'm not picking them as Super Bowl favorites or anything like that. I just think that once they get into the dance, I always thought their ceiling was, okay, maybe their absolute ceiling was upset a team on Wild Card Weekend. Like that was their division, and then they're bounced out. So I have them at 10-7. They win these last 2 games, they're at 10-7. But if they can, stay not beating themselves and continue the play that they've had, they've got a chance to, maybe end someone's playoff run a little early.
Curious, the weather forecast at all for New Year's Day, New Year's Eve in Tampa? I'm not know if it's going to be a chilly one or expecting any rain or just a normal game day experience.
It looks like it's going to be 42 low, 66 high, sunny. So
Okay.
Great football weather.
Yep.
So I'll have to bring a jacket.
It's chilly in Florida at 66. My friends up north, they all like say I'm crazy. I'm like, well, you guys don't understand. It's a different type of cold.
Right.
Trust me. And there's not the level of humidity either that we get here to keep it a little warmer.
Right.
Guys, I've been to that stadium before, but it was for, I think I drove down for a Giants game, like back in like 2013 or something. And that pirate ship still freaks me out every time it goes off.
That's great.
Every time.
Yeah, the pirate ship's great. They had it all dressed up and Christmas lights recently, but yeah.
Gotcha. Well, JC, appreciate it. Been talking to JC Allen, Bucs reporter and writer for Sports Illustrated's Bucs Game Day. Also hosts a podcast called Pirate Parlay. Check it out. Saints 7-8, Bucs 8-7, going at it this weekend. Woohoo! Let's do it. NFC South on the line, baby. Thanks so much for your time, man. And say hi to your cat for me.
Absolutely. I and the kids. They're all here right now. You can find me there. I'll talk to you guys later.
Appreciate your time, man.
Thanks.
Absolutely. Bye.
All right. Thanks again to JC for coming on. This is the first. Well, I appreciate that this is the second rematch we've had, and both times we've had the same guest from the earlier matchup. And it is funny to go back and kind of hear the tone and everything. It's like we had Desmond Johnson on, and it was like week 2. There was all this hope and optimism around what could happen with that team, and by week what was it? 14, 13? I think it was week 14. It was just like, just get it over with. Just ended. And then but with JC, it's like I think that week 4 there was like cautious optimism with that Bucs team, but there was this idea that it was like, yeah, this is still a project, right? And now it's like 8-7, like fuck yeah. Even though after that game, that is the funny thing. It's like, again, the Saints, and I said this, like the Saints have only seen the Bucs at high points. They've not seen the Bucs at low points, and the entirety between the games was low points. They a 1-6 stretch in this season, and they're going to win the NFC South. Think about that.
That's what it's like. What makes this season even, you look at just everything that's happened with the Saints, the teams around them, and it's just a sad season overall with this Saints squad. A lot of disappointment considering what we all thought when we saw this schedule.
Yeah, the frustration is that it's not over, but it feels over, right? Because even if the Saints win this week, they would need the Panthers to beat the Bucs in week 18. But I think for the pride of this Saints team, right? I think it is an important, whether they make the playoffs or not, I think the ability to go out, whether you think Dennis Allen is the future, like there's a lot of members of this roster that you need to depend on going forward. And I would really like to see them show some pride and go out there and win this game, right? They've played well in the state of Florida, but it was not that long ago. They went out there with Dennis Allen in 2020 and won 9-0, right? Like this team has played well in that stadium. And so, it would be nice to, and the funny thing is, like, the Bucs are a game over 500, right? It would be nice to kind of force them to take a seat and be like, we are a 500 football team heading into week 18, and then have to force them to make that decision of like, is Baker really the guy? Because they also played in the dog shit division, right? Like if they were a good team, wouldn't they be, 10-7 at minimum, right? So I don't know. I just think it's funny because they're going to be they're going to be the ones that have to make that decision now of like, is this good enough? Do we need to? Because I don't know if that is. And, at least the Saints aren't the only ones. That's all I'm kind of saying there.
No, I'm very curious to see too, is like, I don't see how you don't pay Baker, but how much are they willing to dole out to him?
Yeah, that is a good question. I mean, like, so is it going to be like a Jameis deal, right? Like what Jameis is currently on, right? He signed 2 years, 26. I imagine that would be kind of where it is. But or is it the Geno deal, right? It depends how much hardball Baker's going to play. Because
Right.
I don't think Baker has less leverage than Geno did, you know? So it's really more of a question of how committed are the Bucs to this project, and we'll have to see. And I think going out and winning the NFC South this week, like I think there's a lot at stake for both of these teams, and it's a little bit more than just winning the division, particularly for Baker. Like if like the Bucs finishing 10-7 and winning it on their terms feels like, I guess they wouldn't have to, because they actually would clinch with a win this week. But like I think clinching the NFC South this week and allowing for that week of rest, whereas like compared to losing this week and having to back in with a win over the Panthers, would feel very different. But maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm just speaking through black and gold colored glasses here.
I don't know. Like you got to worry. I would think, though, if you're Bucs, obviously you've seen what's happened, with Baker in the past. He's kind of a Jekyll and Hyde type of player, and who's to say that he doesn't revert back to, his bad Baker ways next season?
They start giving him Hulu commercials again, and he just like falls off a cliff. I do think,
he's talking about being locked in Raymond James Stadium instead of, the other Cleveland Stadium, right?
It is funny, and like everyone, you kind of just look past it, but I feel like there is a pretty solid correlation between having way too much advertising and not being as good at football as you were when they gave you that advertising.
It's pretty wild.
Like all I see on TV are Pat Mahomes and Travis Kelce, right? Jalen Hurts. Suddenly, and Baker, right? But Baker got that advertising because he was good in 2020. And then it just all kind of fell off a cliff, right? And I just think it's funny. Like, it's like, there has to be there does feel like there's a correlation.
Even I'll say Cam Jordan had a little, has had a drop off this year. He had that Caesars commercial. Little Caesars, right?
He had several Little Caesars commercials, and they're funny, and I appreciate them. But like the quality of the commercials does not seem to correlate to the quality of the play.
I totally agree with that, man.
And now we're looking at it's like all I see on TV is Travis Kelce and Pat Mahomes talking to Jake from State Farm, whose real name is Kevin. I looked this up because I was like, what happened to the original Jake from State Farm?
I guess they didn't pay him.
Whose name was actually Jake. I think his name is Jake Stone in real life. Now it's Kevin Miles, who I'm sure like you would be flabbergasted by how much money those like top spokesmen make. Like Flo from Progressive makes an insane amount.
Ridiculous,
Kevin
right?
From State Farm. Jake from State Farm, whose name is Kevin. But yeah, anyway, I don't even know. Yeah. So if the Bucs want to re-sign Baker to a long-term deal, they have to add a clause in there that says you are only allowed, like, how the Kyler had like the study requirement. Like, yeah, Baker will have to have like an advertising minimum where you can only spend like 2 hours per week on commercial shoots.
Yeah, because obviously he's a good personality, and I'm sure that the Tampa Bay market's going to want to, flood those commercial waves with pics of Baker, or who knows what's going to happen there. Yeah,
the NIL of the NFL.
Yes.
But all right, let's wrap up that segment. We're going to come back. We're going to talk a bit about what are we going to talk about? I forgot. I want to talk about what Mickey Loomis said this week about drafting quarterbacks, which is effectively a no comment, which I think is interesting. And then we're going to hit on X factors as we do heading into this Week 18 matchup with the Bucs. Saints still alive in the playoffs, but barely. And that is where I'll leave it. This is Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak. He is Steve Geller. You can follow me on Twitter at Jeff_Nowak. You can follow him at Steve Geller WWL. You can follow the show at Saints_pod. And who dat? We'll be right back. And we're back on Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak. He's Steve Geller. One more segment here as we prepare for Saints at Bucs. Saints went into that Week 16 game with the worst possible travel setup in terms of traveling cross country on a short week. Now you go into Week 17 with the easiest possible travel setup, 10 days off and a puddle jumper flight over the Gulf to face Tampa. But I'm still not feeling good about it. I'd like to, maybe I'm overreacting. I do fall into the recency bias thing. When you watch them beat the heck out of the Jags, and granted, Trevor Lawrence feels like a shell of himself right now that he was earlier in the season. They beat the shit out of the Jags. I mean, like a lot of times I'll hold out hope and I'll be like, well, this game isn't over at halftime. That game was over at halftime. And it was, and it's like, not only because of Trevor Lawrence, like the Bucs just played well. And I think if the Saints see that same Bucs team, they don't have much of a chance this week.
It's obviously a tough go. I'm holding out hope for this team just because it is a divisional opponent. You know how all bets are off kind of deal when you're facing an NFC South rival, and that's what I'm hoping for. Honestly, in the finale, that Carolina can do something magical and knock them off if the Saints can take care of their business, winning their last two, and then the game's in Carolina. And maybe Bryce Young wants to go out on a high note with that offense and is able to do something. But yeah, that's a whole nother story we'll get into, I'm sure, next week more as well. But I feel you. It was kind of embarrassing watching what transpired in that game with the Rams. I was just completely and utterly baffled on how just Stafford and that Rams receiving core was able to pick the Saints apart.
Yeah, and I think that's contributed to the just general feeling that this season is completely over, because if you watched how that game went, how could you possibly look at this Saints team as one that can win games? Yeah. And the funny thing is, so we talked last week about how, it's like the Saints are in that middle tier, but they're at the bottom of it. And someone responded who said, they're not at the bottom of the middle, they're at the top of the bottom. And I was like, that's the same thing. You're talking about the same team. Like, what are you talking about?
Sure. What do you want to argue with me about right there? Right.
What are we arguing about? That's literally the same thing. Fine, say that, but one way or the other. That's
top of the worst, guys.
Yeah. I mean, like, we don't have to argue about everything. We're saying the same fucking thing. But, and that kind of leads me into, what Mickey Loomis was asked this week by Bobby Hebert. And, the funny thing is, so for context, this is kind of how the sausage gets made here. This week, Mickey Loomis was on kind of a combination Saints Hour coaches show, which the coaches show is usually Dennis Allen, but because of the holiday, there was no coaches show on Monday. So the Saints Hour was on Tuesday, and that show is Bobby Hebert and Mike Haas. And so it's typically just Mike interviewing Mickey. And when Bobby gets involved, you'll get a little bit more off the wall questions because Bobby will not be silenced. And so Mickey was asked about whether they would look at a quarterback in the draft. And, I tweeted his answer just so it was on the record, because I thought people would be interested in how he reacted to that answer. And here's that question and the answer.
Mickey, fans have asked me, and I'm just a voice of the fans, and I'm just trying to keep it in the right perspective. When you look at, like, the quarterback position, much is given, much is required, and it changes year to year. And you can it's always hindsight. You look in the past at what happens in the future. For instance, like Alex Smith. He was a solid Kansas City Chief quarterback. Then they draft Patrick Mahomes. We were in the bidding of Pat Mahomes. So you probably were part of that with Sean Payton, obviously. We got Marshawn Lattimore, how that played itself out. But the question I have for you, are y'all willing right now, even though you have the money invested in Derek Carr, are y'all willing to maybe draft a future quarterback, whether it be a Jane Daniels from LSU or whatever, that okay, not only 2024, then you got to look at 2025, because fans have told me, well, look, Alex Smith, he was the quarterback for 1 year, then they passed the torch, and we all know what occurred there. So is that a possibility that you could draft a quarterback if you really like him, like high in this draft, and maybe make moves to move up to get the quarterback of the future beyond Derek Carr?
Look, Bobby, you're asking me to speculate about the future, and we're in the middle of a season. I'm not going to do that. That's a silly what if exercise. So I'm not even going to go down that path.
Yeah, and so I tweeted that answer, not because it's an answer, but because I thought just people would be interested to see, okay, this is how he responded to it. And the funny thing to me is it's not reacting to, like the majority of the reaction is, what does he mean they're in the middle of the season? There's 2 games left and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, really? That's what we're taking away from this? We're policing the term in the middle of, which is just like, that's just how English works. Like, that's just how we've all sat here and heard words said before, and we can understand that like in the middle of something means it's ongoing. It's not saying like we're exactly halfway through the season. like people are just looking for any reason to be mad about what Mickey says, what TA says. And I'm like, that's a stretch. But I actually don't think that there's anything wrong with that answer. I think he was pretty, one thing that's been pretty clear as this season has gone on, in my opinion, and listening to these interviews, which I do every week, is that Mickey's fuse has gotten a lot shorter in terms of how he's going to react to questions that he doesn't appreciate. And that was one of those instances where he could have just been like, I'm not talking about that now. But like it was like the lazy and uneducated thing all over again, where it's just like this. It's a reasonable question. You don't have to answer it.
Everybody's aggravated or fed up meter is, I think, at an all-time high right now. So
exactly, and that's kind of what I'm kind of leading into. It's I think if like Mickey does a very good job of presenting a very measured, even-keeled demeanor, approach, tone. But I think like there is frustration, right? Like I think it's very like you can, if you read between the lines and you kind of just can kind of understand like that fuse is getting shorter because the front office is as frustrated as a lot of other people out there. Maybe not as frustrated. I think there's always a middle ground. But like if you think that this front office is sitting there being like, the dog in the fire, where it's like this is fine. I don't think that that's what's happening. Now, they're not going to make all of the decisions that you want them to make in terms of if it was up to a lot of fans, they would have fired Dennis Allen after like week 3 of the 2022 season, right? Like we would have never even gone to this point. But I do think that there will be, it's not a question of, and I've said this earlier in the season, it's not a question of whether changes will be made. It's how broad and sweeping they are.
Yeah.
And will that include drafting a quarterback? I almost think, and I know I'll get flack for this, but I almost think this is the wrong year to draft a quarterback because of the uncertainty with the head coach, at least in terms of drafting a quarterback, like trading, so if you want Jaden Daniels and your only option is to go all in and give up a ton of draft picks and go up and get him. Even if you brought in a new head coach, there would be a lot of question marks around, okay, what does this coach want? How is this coach going to build? Where is the offense going to look like? This and that. And I don't know if you can establish that in year 1 under a new head coach. And if you decide not to do that and you decide to keep Dennis Allen and rebuild the offensive staff, that would mean that you are going all in for a quarterback with a coach with probably the shortest leash on the planet. So like, I don't know if this is the year to draft a quarterback, but at the end of the day, it's going to come down to what happens over these final 2 games, because your draft slot can change a lot in these final 2 weeks, right? And so no GM on the planet is going to dive into, this is what we're looking at. This is the quarterback we're going to draft in week 17. He's not going to do that at any point, but he's definitely not going to do that in week 17 because, and I quote, you are in the middle of a season. And that is accurate because the season is ongoing. This is the middle. The end is over there. You can see the end, but you're still in it. And so, like I think the same reason I'm not going to really get into draft talk right now is the same reason that Mickey's like, why are you even asking me about the draft right now We're trying to win a game.
Right. You're not talking flight. You're talking draft. The draft. We're trying to go to the playoffs.
Draft picks.
What's crazy though is, as you know, and mock drafts are, I can't stand them, honestly. And we've been seeing them come out already. And I'm seeing the Saints at number 11 drafting Jaden Daniels. And I'm like, how is that possible?
Well, because mock drafts are dumb. That's why. And then you get to the draft and Jaden Daniels goes at number 5. And you'll be like, well, but my mock draft said this.
He was going to be available at 11.
Yeah. Well, and the funny thing is, like, and here's the thing. A lot of the teams at the top of the draft are going to be quarterback needy teams. So when you get into it, your options are not necessarily going to be draft a quarterback or don't draft a quarterback. Your options are going to be give up a ton of assets and trade up for a quarterback, or sit where you are and take the best player available. And when you have a lot of quarterbacks going off the board early, some of those players are going to be elite tackles, or I think like people complain about the offensive line, but then they're like, oh, they're just going to draft a lineman. I'm like, yeah, but that's what you should do. Like that's what you have to do. Like one of the biggest issues for this team is that you don't have a left tackle.
Protect Derek.
I can't remember who it was. I can't remember who it was, but they shared a clip of the Christmas Day game where Alvin ran for 6 touchdowns, and they were like, the crazy thing is this is basically the same offensive line, except you don't have Teron Armstead. We're like, yeah, except you're saying that, yeah, this is the same group, except you don't have the far and away best player out of these 5 players. That's a fucking big difference. It's not like, well, the 4 of the 5. It's like, yeah, but your best player isn't there. Like it's like saying the 2021 receiver groups. Oh, it's basically the same, except you don't have Mike Thomas. Like, yeah, but that's right. That's important. And also it's like, yeah, but you're also talking about Andres Peter, the guard who's playing left tackles. Like he's the same guy, but he's not at the same position. And Ryan Ramczyk, 3 years later, as his knee is gone. So it's not the same. It is nowhere near the same. It's like just because it's the same players, yeah, that's you could say the same offensive line from 2010. You could put the same offensive line on the field in 2016. That doesn't mean it's the same quality. And like, so to me, it's like you're gonna look at this draft and everyone's gonna be climbing over themselves to say, draft Jaden Daniels, draft this guy, draft a quarterback. And it's like you look at these teams who do that and they bring in the quarterback without a system around them to protect the quarterback, right? And then you see what happens. So I'm just going to say it right now. I will fully endorse the Saints taking a left tackle if there's a left tackle, like a high-end left tackle on the board, because that's what you need in the NFL. It's not just like, well, they have the entire offensive line except for Teron Armstead. And we're like, yeah, well, the reason Teron Armstead was the best player on the offensive line is because he was the best player. Anyway, so that's that. Anything else you want to add?
No, with the Saints too, man. It's like, yeah, right now we know Derek Carr is not going anywhere, whether folks like it or not. And I'm with you. You got to protect the guy. We've seen him get roughed up way too much this season already.
Yeah, and like I think they'll look at the draft and they'll say, well, if only they had hit on these picks. It's like one of the picks that you missed on was you trying to add that left tackle. And one of the reasons that you're struggling so much is because you missed on that pick.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's just, I just think people will look at the end result and not look at the bigger picture of like when you add a quarterback to a roster that is built, your odds of winning, regardless of whether that quarterback is high. Like I would rather have a middle of the road quarterback with a built up roster that can protect him rather than an elite quarterback that's just, running for his life at every given opportunity, unless that quarterback is Lamar Jackson.
Then you just have to watch out for referees taking him out.
Yeah. Then you just have to draft him instead of trading up for Marcus Davenport, and you'll be just fine.
Wah, wah.
I have seen people comparing Jaden Daniels to Lamar Jackson. I'm like, have you watched Jaden Daniels play? Like it's the standard we're gonna, like I saw someone they compared Jaden Daniels to Lamar Jackson as the comp, and then they compared Drake May to like Josh Allen or somebody like that. Like, that's not the comparison. Jaden Daniels and Lamar Jackson are not similar. They both run, but they run in very different ways.
I guess frame too, you could at least say. I've heard.
See, I disagree with that. I think Jaden Daniels is more of a Teddy Bridgewater frame, if anything. I don't think that Jaden Daniels and Lamar Jackson are similar at all, other than the fact that they both run for a lot of yards, but they do it in vastly different ways. And I just think it's funny. It was like, we're going to compare Jaden Daniels to Lamar Jackson because Lamar Jackson runs. But like, if you've watched Jaden Daniels isn't he's running, but he's running a straight line. like he's fast, but he's not juking people in the backfield. He's not running 30 yards back from the line. Like, they're completely different players, and Lamar's better. But it's just you need a pocket passer who can run, and that's what Jaden Daniels is. That's why I like Jaden Daniels. But he's not Lamar Jackson. There's only one Lamar Jackson.
Yeah, I've heard even terrible comp. I forget who it was saying that, comparing Jaden Daniels to Jalen Hurts, and to me that was ridiculous too.
I actually, in terms of their play style, I actually agree. Other than the QB draws in the middle, he's
right.
not. The difference is like the frame, but what they try to do is similar. Like, you see Jalen Hurts run for a lot of yards, but you see him running in a straight line and then getting out of bounds, right? Like, he's not juking people downfield, and he is trying to stay in the pocket and get the ball out as a passer. And when he does throw it, he can throw some dimes. Whereas Lamar, I don't think his arm is at the elite level that a Jaden Daniels is, but he can do so much with his legs that it eliminates, it's such an X factor that as long as he can avoid those big hits and be smart about it, then they can beat anybody. But I actually think from a play style perspective, Jalen Hurts is a better comp. But Jalen Hurts squats 600 pounds, right? Like, everyone talks about the tush push as if anyone can do this. Like, no, Jalen Hurts can do that because Jalen Hurts is built like a tree stump.
Yeah. And you have an elite center too, help it out.
Yeah. But I mean, the reason that works is because you have Jason Kelce, who is very good. And it's like people talk about the people pushing him. It's not really the people pushing him. It's the fact that Jalen Hurts is able to, he looks almost like, I saw Saquon Barkley doing what Jalen Hurts was doing in that game against the Eagles. And it was a 2-point conversion where it was like the reason it worked is because Saquon Barkley has the strongest lower body on the planet. And he's just in there, just, working like a jackhammer. But that's something that Jaden can't do. That's why everyone gets obsessed with comps. And it's it's not as simple as saying, well, this guy's ceiling is this guy and this guy's ceiling is this guy. It's an amalgamation of 20 different things. And at the end of the day, it's so much more about what's in their head than, every quarterback coming in has elite traits, right? So why isn't every quarterback successful? Where in a lot of cases, it's because that shift from the college game is a lot more about processing and your ability to identify and adjust than it is, having a golden arm. Otherwise Ryan Mallett would be a Hall of Famer.
Wow.
Sorry. All right, let's close this out with some X factors. Going into that Bucs game, we know how they played in week 4, I should say. What would you say is the X factor for the Saints on defense in this game?
I always focus on the D-line. This week I'm looking at the secondary, Jeff, just because of how pathetic it looked against the Rams, and I'm a little concerned here. Obviously, no Marshawn Lattimore. We talked about it a little bit with our Bucs guest, and who's going to be taking care of Mike Evans in this matchup? Because man, oh man, he's been on a tear this season, leads the NFL in receiving touchdowns. But yeah, I'm looking at everybody in the secondary to respond in some kind of way, because Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, and whoever it was for the Rams just were able to eat up and tear apart this Saints secondary.
Yeah, they do it in different ways, right? One of the things the Rams did a lot of, and it was a big part of the reason Alontae was benched, is they run a ton of motion, and you got to handle that. The Bucs don't do a ton of that, although, like Alontae said, they might see that film and be like, hey, this is something we're going to do more of, so you got to handle it if they do. I think, the Godwin matchup might be a bigger matchup in terms of I think the Saints still, like, even without Marshawn, I think they do have the physical corners on the outside that can battle with Mike. You're not going to win every time. But I think that matchup in the middle with Chris Godwin coming out of the slot is going to be very difficult. And it's going to be on Alontae, who is coming off of probably his worst game, to match up. So, I think the secondary is a good pick there. If I'm going back to week 4, and the one of the things that made that game feel impossible to win, two things. One is stopping the run on first down, which they were not able to do very well at all. Like, Keyshawn Vaughn didn't have a huge game, but it was the first down yardage. You're talking about 4 yards, 5 yards, 6 yards on first down makes life a lot easier on the offense. And Saints weren't able to stop Kyron Williams last week. But they need to, like, what people ask DA, well, why didn't Zach Bond get more snaps? I'm like, well, this is ridiculous. Why did he only get 9-10 snaps? Well, it's because you didn't, like, he's a situational pass rusher. He's not a full-time defensive end. He's a guy you get on the field in third and medium to third and long situations. Like, he's not getting on the field in 3rd and 3, right? He's getting on the field in 3rd and 5, 3rd and 7, 3rd and 10, 3rd and 13, right? Those are the pass rush downs. And you just didn't get many of them. And a big part of that is because you didn't stop the run. Against the Giants, you did, right? That's one of the biggest differences. And you saw a Giants team go out and look solid. They looked like a team that could win a game against the Eagles, right? And it's a big part is because they were able to run the ball. Tyrod Taylor's going to start again this week. So I think that gives the Giants a much better chance to win. But to me, that's it. Can you stop the run on first down and even second down? And also on third down, can you get Baker to the ground? Like, when you look at the mobile quarterbacks the Saints have faced and the guys that the Saints have not been able to sack, Baker has to be the most frustrating because he is by far the least athletic of all the quarterbacks that have given you troubles. Right? Baker's not a guy who should be able to just run around and make 7 guys miss. And hopefully, like, one of the things that you didn't have in that matchup last week 4, feels like last year, was Zach Bond in the pass rush, right? So if you can get them into third and long situations, is Zach Bond able to make an impact in this game? Where, like, that's one of the few things that the Saints have changed and are doing differently now than they were in week 4. So hopefully that's because there were several situations in that game the Saints had a chance to get to Baker and get him to the ground and make a game-changing play or end a drive early. And instead he would scramble for 7-8 yards and extend a drive. And then you have a 13-play drive for a touchdown, right? And those types of drives completely demoralize the defense. So to me, that's the X factor. Can you stop running on first down, and can you get Baker to the ground on 3rd and long? If you can do that, then that week 4 game is a lot closer than it was, right? And you had Ike Adam in that game too. You had him filling in for Paulson Adebo in that game. So yeah, I think to me that's it. But let's shift gears here. What about offense for you?
Man, I still don't know if this team knows how they're using Taysom Hill. A question mark last week. Once again, it just seemed he was completely tossed aside and not even considered. And then there's other weeks where the involvement is, I like the snaps that he's getting. He seems to be, more involved with the offense. But to me, this Buccaneers team, for whatever reason, Taysom seems to have pretty good games against Tampa, and I just want to see him. No,
Absolutely not. What are you talking about?
I'm just thinking about. I guess he had a
2020. He did. In 2020, he did. That 38-3 game, he did. But again, when you have a lead and you can pound the Taysom Hill offense, that's the different equation. But the last few times they've faced the Bucs, he has not.
Okay.
So like you're thinking about 9-0, right? Like he started that game. But
yeah, I just recalled him too having a block punt in Tampa.
Yeah, well, I mean that was a long time ago. But so you're talking about week 2, week 4. I keep saying week 2. He had 1 completion for 13 yards. He had 4 rushes for 10 yards.
Yeah, I miss his physicality last game, and I just think the Saints need to bring that against the Buccaneers. I guess that's really it for me. I just appreciate that tough running physical style. And I know the Saints are going to have to, they're going to need that against Tampa. And I think you just got to get Taysom more involved. His lack of touches last game seemed pretty eye popping.
Yeah. I mean, so last year he had 6 carries for 24 yards in those 2 games. In 2021, he obviously started the second game. Even then, it was 11 carries for 33 yards. He didn't play in the other matchup. 2020 was the last time you could look at it and say he's had a good game against Tampa. In the 38-3 game, he had 7 carries for 54 yards. And in the week 1 game, 3 carries for 13 yards. So I think part of it is, the Taysom offense doesn't work as well when you're going up against very athletic linebackers and like a strong D line, right?
That they have for sure,
and that's what the Bucs have in waves, right? And so, it's also like last week, I didn't see the Taysom offense do like when you run Taysom and he loses 3 yards. That's the reason that part of the offense works is because it's like a programmed 2 to 5 yard gain with the potential to break it for a long gain. But like when you're losing yards, that's as good as a penalty because you're taking the quarterback off the field, so you're not able to make sight adjustments and change the play the way that you might be able to otherwise. And then they're able to load up and do what they want to do to stop that because you're like, again, and I'm going to go back to it. My issue isn't so much, well, they're not pounding Taysom Hill into the line 8 times a game. My issue is that you're using Taysom in only predictable ways. Right. And he is a guy whose entire skill set is being unpredictable. Like, that's what drives me nuts. And they have gotten him more involved as a receiver. But again, it's like you should have instances where you get a certain look with Taysom. You send Taysom out there in a package with Derek Carr. You get a certain look, and you have the option to check into a Taysom run because they're giving you a dime look with Taysom on the field, right? Like, why do we never do that? And that's what drives me nuts about the Taysom package. Because it's like the whole point of Taysom Hill is that you can take advantage of the other team by doing something that they can't defend. But you never take advantage of that. You only use Taysom in situations where the optimal defensive grouping is on the fields. And that's so dumb to me. It's so dumb. And I think it's to me, it's an indictment on the creativity of this offensive staff. And they're using Taysom in just the most simple, predictable ways. And I don't think the answer is to do that more. I guess you could do that more, right? Like you could do it more, but I don't think that would solve your issues. I think you need to take advantage of Taysom. Throwback passes, right? Like stuff that's creative. Like you have a guy who can run the ball or throw the ball, yet you only put him in situations where he's either going to run it or throw it. There are no options.
Wow. You mentioned the creativity. It's like, we have a huge red zone target that all he does is catch touchdowns, but for some reason we don't decide to use him either.
I mean, they've used him more. They only got into the red zone once again. I mean, like, I'm not going to fault them for using Jimmy Graham in the red zone. I'm going to fault them for not using Jimmy Graham in the red zone. And against the Rams, they didn't really get into the red zone. They got in the red zone once and they scored, which I think was a touchdown pass to Juwan Johnson. Yeah. That's the funny thing. It's like, that game went terribly, but they did score. They went 1 for 1 in the red zone. So if you look at it, like this team is like rapidly climbing up the red zone efficiency charts. Because they think they're 10 of their last 11 in terms of touchdowns in the red zone, which is actually pretty remarkable efficiency. But it hasn't resulted in a win when you needed it. I mean, you did have 2 wins, so it's not like you're looking at that. Like that's the frustrating thing is like this team is still in position to potentially finish 4 out of 5, but they just haven't been able to string that 3rd win together. And yeah, I've also had people telling me that Dennis Allen is the worst thing that's ever happened to head coaching in the NFL. And I'm like, have you guys didn't know like Urban Meyer exists? We'll get into that. That's another conversation for another day. But I agree, like being creative on offense and finding ways to just not be so predictable to me is my X factor. And so whether that's through Taysom Hill or whether that's through, the tight ends and Jimmy Graham and like, I don't need trick plays, right? I don't need fancy footwork and end arounds and reverse passes and stuff like that. But I do think that the fact that we just have seen literally none of that is pretty indicative of how little creativity goes into this offense. Like whether it's motions or whatever. And to me, that was the biggest difference last week. If you're looking at where this offense is compared to where a good, well-constructed NFL offense is like watching how like the Sean McVay offense approached that game compared to a Pete Carmichael offense. It looked like they were in different leagues. And the Saints moved the ball, right? But like it's just not, you're not doing anything that's really making life difficult on the defense. And I don't, it's hard to even call that an X factor because I don't expect it to happen. But that's, to me, that's one of the big issues for this offense is it's so bland and so predictable, and you can't even seem to do your basic stuff well. So I don't even have an X factor. I'm just so frustrated by that.
We need Pete Carmichael to get in his bag.
I don't think that's the thing.
I don't know if he's got a bag.
I think his bag is
Right.
at the bottom if it's not closed. So you try to put something in the bag and it just falls out.
Yeah.
And I will give him credit. Like he does he does change things up. I just don't think that he has the bandwidth to really outclass other teams. Like I think he's a good game. And I'm talking about in-game type stuff. I'm talking about in the heat of the moment, coming up with something that's going to work. Like I think he's a good game planner. I think he's a good coach, right? I just don't think that like the in-game like decision making. I just don't think that's his bag. And so yeah, well, I mean, we'll see. And that's just like one of the myriad problems this team has to face this offseason. And it's going to be interesting to see if they do it and how they do it. But we'll see. Maybe some magic happens this final 2 weeks, and I don't think it's going to change how a lot of people feel, even if they did.
We need a late Christmas miracle for sure.
Yeah, that's easily like the most demoralizing part of it is you could win this game and have this huge upset, or I don't know how huge it would be, a 7-8 team beating an 8-7 team, and then go out and beat the Falcons, and still like you've put yourself in a situation where that's not enough. And that's the story of the last two seasons, right?
Exactly. A lot of similarities there from last year to this year in that aspect, just the disappointing outcomes we've had. But, you know, there is still something to play for. I am still pulling for this team to make the playoffs. As crazy, I know, as some people think that is. But, yeah, obviously the odds are not in the Saints' favor.
I'm not going to root for a loss. I think the way I approach situations like this, and trust me, as someone who's watched a lot of Giants games, this is a situation I found myself in quite a bit. So I can give you some of that insight into how to approach a game when your team is no longer really in contention. And I've always kind of felt like it's like I'm going to watch this game and I'm going to root for my team to win. And it's like you don't sit there and get mad if your team is playing really good football and looks good. You try to pull the positives out of it, and you say, well, you want young players to build, and you want people to get players to get better, and you want to see things developing. But where it helps is not during the game. Like you just get lost in the fact that you're watching a football game and you're rooting and you're just a fan of that team, right? That's how I've always approached it. And then at the end, if and when your team does lose, that's where the benefit is of like, yeah, we lost, but that's probably for the best, right? That's when that mood hits you, because that's only going to improve your draft pick. And it would have been nice to win because winning a game is fun, but you're not mad about it because it does mean you get a better pick. Like that's where you approach it. It should not be going into the game and the Saints score an opening touchdown. And you're like, damn it. Like to me, that's not the approach. And again, I've had to do this a lot.
Speaking from experience.
I am speaking from experience because at the end of the day, you know, like I've watched that Giants team and I don't watch them as closely anymore, you know, but I was very invested in like the early 2000s, right? In like the early 2010s. And trust me when I say picking at 6th compared to 9th, you can still mess up that pick. Trust me, it's easy to do. Go ask Eric Flowers. Daniel Jones, right? Like, oh man, we're gonna take Daniel Jones at number 6. They didn't even trade up for that. It was just like, oh, got it.
Crap, I got to get going.
All right. Well, yeah, that's it. That's the Inside Black and Gold. Steve's got to run. His mom's in town. They're gonna get Cheesecake Factory or something. Thanks everyone for listening. I'm Jeff Nowak. He's Steve Geller. You can follow me on Twitter at Jeff_Nowak. You follow him at Steve Geller WWL. I'll be out in Tampa. He will be hosting the pregame show on Sunday, and that includes the pregame show to the pregame show and the postgame show.
Yay!
So a busy day.
Been so much fun this year.
Yeah, always. But thanks everyone for listening. Who dat? Go Saints! Beat the Bucs!
Beat the Bucs!
All right. Peace, y'all. Be easy.
Who dat?